hot button items of today. So, there are now 2 vaccines. Let's talk about them. Let's talk about the concept of vaccines. I'm not going to talk about the specific vaccine, although I can. And let me tell you where I'm coming from in this discussion a little bit. So, I read. I've tried to show that in the way that I present these, and I read a lot. And when I read, I have told you before, I think absolutely when you read, the big thing is to go beyond the media story. The media is feeding us a line of stuff, and we should go beyond that. And so I have been digging into actual articles, peer-reviewed articles, although there's a limited amount of peer-reviewed stuff on COVID altogether because of the kind of year it's been. There's been a lot of research thrown out there and a lot of papers thrown out there, but there's been a limited amount of work that can be done on them, because while there's lots of pools of people, academics don't automatically get access to piles of sick people, things like that. So it's been mostly digging through and looking at data and those sorts of things, which is good. And I think the data is going to be interesting. I've said before, I think that we're not going to know for at least a couple more years beyond this year exactly how deadly COVID was, because right now there's lots of reasons not to believe the numbers that are out there, to not believe them in multiple directions, not to believe that the death rate is as high. Why? Well, because multiple states have had to admit that if a person tested positive for COVID, they put them on their died of COVID list no matter what they died of. I saw one the other day, that one county in, might have been North Dakota or something, but there was one county out there that came up that it was interesting. There was an interesting correlation, and that was that every person in the county who died of COVID also had a gunshot wound. That's an interesting correlation. It's an interesting pair of symptoms. I haven't read anything about COVID that says COVID causes you to shoot yourself. I've read lots that say a COVID year might cause you to shoot yourself, but not COVID itself. And so we're going to find that those things are high. I've seen mixed information without much hard data to show. For instance, I have read the stories that said there have been more deaths this year than there are in a non-COVID year, but I looked into those and they're not backed up by that much hard stuff. Because I've also read stuff that very clearly says the total number of heart attacks is way down this year, for instance, which is understandable. If we're attributing things to COVID and not heart attacks, then they're COVID deaths. They're being counted as COVID deaths, not heart attack deaths. And I've said all along, I think how deadly this was is going to be something for statisticians to figure out over time. That those are the exact things they need to look into. They know at a very high level of accuracy how many people would have died normally in this year of what causes. It's only when you take the COVID deaths and you subtract out of them the missing deaths in other categories that we're going to know exactly how deadly COVID was. And I'm reading lots of stuff. I think the most solid stuff says that COVID is about as deadly as the flu, somewhere pretty close to there. Although the evidence is becoming, as we've known how to treat it better and better, it's actually looking like it's going to fall below the deadliness of the flu. I'm not saying it's as deadly the number of people who would die, because we've had a vaccine for the flu, and so the numbers are very different. It's of the people who caught it, how many die. It's looking like it's going to be similar, or if you were to take the last 4 months, for instance, and go forward and say, okay, now that we know about COVID, it's looking like COVID is actually not as deadly as the flu, as long as you have treatment regimens for it, which we have. And the flu we've known about for a long, long time. And so the flu is less deadly than it would be if we had no clue how to fight it. So all of those things are interesting to me. But the next step of this is the vaccine. And I get asked, because of who I am and because I have a big mouth and because of the things I talk about, I get asked about vaccine a lot. And because of who I am and because I believe in individual liberty, people are often surprised at what my position is. And maybe some of you are going to be surprised at what my position is. So let's lay out my position very clearly. My position is you absolutely control what goes into your body. So I do not believe I do not believe the government should be able to force you to be vaccinated. A. I believe B, with freedom comes responsibility. And that is, we as a society have the right to say, you may choose not to be vaccinated, but we have the right to exclude you from places where people are because you choose not to be vaccinated. Okay? That vaccines are some of the most well-recognized, most well-accepted, and best researched medicine that there is. And much of the negatives about vaccines that you hear is absolutely false. There are almost, at this point in science, there are almost no there are almost no hypothesis as disproven as the hypothesis that autism is caused by vaccines. Why? Well, we know, number one, the original article that said that, the original peer-reviewed academic article, was a fraud. The guy who wrote it has admitted it was a fraud, and he lost his medical license over it, and the journal retracted it. Not that most people who are arguing it have ever read those sorts of things, but it's the case. It was a pure fraud. There is a monumental problem in America with people's understanding of correlation versus causation. Okay? And we could have a long discussion about that. I believe the science is very, 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 very clear. And people say, well, we could go very much into the things that anti-vaxxers say. That's not really what I'm here about right now. That's not going to be solved in time to make a difference here. What I absolutely believe, though, is that we as a group of people, okay, as a society, go back to, if you haven't seen it, go back to my video on the concept of liberty, on liberty versus freedom. You have the absolute freedom to not take the vaccine. But liberty says that to live within a society, we are trying to be as free as possible, and that is as much freedom as I can have without my freedom interfering into your freedom. And we as a group of people can get together. Some people think because of who I am that I don't believe in laws. That's garbage. That's why, by the way, I said clearly I am not a libertarian. I think the concepts of the libertarians are primarily based as much on fantasy as liberalism is. That it relies upon a world that doesn't actually exist. This idea that you should be free to do anything you want to. And this non-law-based thing. No, as a society, as a group of people, we get together and decide. The example I use over and over again is driving on the road. Driving on the road cannot be done unless we all agree a side of the road to be on. Okay? That, yes, you can argue to the end of the world. You should be free to drive any place on the road that you want to. And that's fine. And we would all be free for an incredibly short time until we crashed into each other and we died. That is stupid. In society, we as a group of people decide how we go about giving some limitations that allow the freedoms to be maximum. That's supposed to be the entire concept of what was created in America. Was how do we have the most possible freedom for everybody? So the laws should be the least limiting that need to be to allow freedom for everybody. In this case, society and science are clear. You can disagree with me. I'm not going to go through the whole thing now and argue to you why vaccines are scientifically correct. I can do that. I can easily do that. I could spend time doing that, but what it is you're on the losing side of that if you disagree with having vaccines. Medical science is clear, and society has decided that we all agree with it's clear, and so we have a right to say if you choose not to vaccinate, you just don't get to join in with us, which is fine. So I am perfectly fine with the government saying you don't have to be vaccinated, but your kids can't go to public school unless they are. I'm perfectly fine with a business saying, you don't have to be vaccinated, but you can't come to our movie theater unless you are. Or you can't come to work in my business unless you are. And that's because vaccines are something we have to do together. Now I'm going to use an example, and I know he'd be okay with it because I heard him give this example just the other day. So my son has a son, so I'm a grandfather. My grandson has immunodeficiency. He has a childhood condition, and his childhood condition means that he has to take a specific medicine, and the specific medicine he takes lowers his immune system. It has to suppress his immune system, and because of that, he is limited on his ability to take vaccines. And in our society, there are all sorts of people who don't get a choice about vaccines. They are either like my grandson, who can't do it, or they're like my other two grandsons, who are too young to have all of their vaccines yet, or they are people with other medical conditions that keep them from being able to have them, or a lot of them are conditions like AIDS and so forth. There are all these handful of people who literally cannot have them. And the miracle of what vaccines are is that vaccines work without 100% of us having them. It's called herd immunity. And herd immunity says if we get enough people, so the way the virus works is the virus has to jump from person to person to person to person. So for a specific person to get it, it has to jump through from a person who has it to that person. It can either do it directly if they're in direct contact, but right now, the whole damn world is getting this COVID thing, and how many of us had direct contact with the bat-eating person in China, or whatever the hell actually happened, but that's still the leading contender as I've heard it, whether it's true or not. It still started in China for sure. It happened in China. How many of us were in direct contact with patient zero? Okay, so it got there by going through the pool of everybody else. The way herd immunity works is if there aren't enough people in contact, the virus in a person is only truly able to jump from person to person for a few days. If that person doesn't come into contact with another person who can catch it in those couple of days, it stops with that person. And so society, we have figured out somewhere between 90 and 98%, someplace in that range for most things, if we can get that percentage of people to be immune to it, then it can't get to the people who can't be made immune to it. So that's the simplicity of how it works. And when it comes down to it, anybody who thinks that the last year isn't a good damn demonstration of what a year of uncontrolled disease looks like, you're just too stupid to be following this, so you're not actually here. I don't think any of you think that because you wouldn't be following this. Okay? It's interesting. I'm not going to tell it, sorry. Sorry to do that to you, but I had a story pop in my head, but I'm not going to tell everyone. What it comes down to is for life to get back going again, either we need to be Sweden and have enough people catch it that we get herd immunity through us catching it, which they're trying and they've done reasonably good with, actually, or we need to get vaccinated. And I think we need to get vaccinated. I think you should be vaccinated. I would like actually to talk to you personally if you follow this and you listen to me all the time and you want to actually have the argument about why you should be vaccinated versus why you shouldn't be vaccinated. I'm more than happy to talk to you directly about that. What I am saying and what I will stand with on this is it is not a liberty issue. A liberty issue says you have the freedom to not be vaccinated, and I will defend your right to not be vaccinated. I will also defend society's right to exclude you from the world of opportunity to be with other people if you were exercising that right to not be vaccinated. If you choose not to be vaccinated, we have the right to choose not to hang out with you. And that includes in places we have to go, like sending our children to school.